I thought I had finally left the chaos behind, that life had settled into quiet routine, while the neighborhood moved on without her. But then Karen returned, fresh out of prison, with the same reckless energy that once made everyone fear her. At first, I froze, unsure if I should confront her or hide. That's when I realized something shocking. Every property she had ever claimed as hers, every corner she once controlled, was now mine. Completely mine. She walked into my domain, expecting the old rules to still apply. What happens when the predator finds the prey has become the master? And more importantly, would she survive the consequences of her return? Life on the block had finally settled into a comfortable rhythm, the kind of quiet that made mornings feel like a promise rather than a challenge. I had invested years into turning the properties into something more than houses, each lawn carefully maintained, fences repaired, and structures strengthened, creating not just a neighborhood but a sanctuary, a place where neighbors waved without suspicion and children played freely, while the sun spilled across the streets. I walked the sidewalks regularly, checking each property, making small improvements, and enjoying the satisfaction of control and security that had been hard-earned. Everyone knew me here, respected my role, and trusted the quiet authority I had cultivated, yet beneath the surface, the history of this block carried whispers of chaos, of people like Karen, once a force of disruption, whose reputation had shadowed the neighborhood long before she disappeared behind prison walls. For years, I'd operated in a delicate balance, aware that power, even when earned, is always fragile, and that someone who believed they had a claim could return to shake it all apart. Still, I never expected the day she would walk back into the frame, unaware that I now held the keys, the deeds, and the control over every property she had ever called hers, and yet a subtle unease had been growing in the back of my mind. A tension I couldn't shake. What happens when the person who once ruled this block returns and finds that their territory is no longer theirs to command, that every step she takes could be met not with fear, but with the authority and strategy of someone who has already prepared for her every move? The morning Karen returned, the air felt electric, heavy with the unspoken tension that only years of unresolved conflict can create. And from the moment her silhouette appeared at the far end of the street, moving with the same audacious confidence that had once made neighbors whisper behind closed doors, I knew the months of preparation, observation, and quiet strategy were about to collide with the unpredictable chaos she brought. I had spent countless hours reviewing property deeds, fortifying fences, installing surveillance, and documenting every inch of the block, so that when the inevitable confrontation arrived, nothing would catch me off guard. And now, as she stepped onto the sidewalk of the very block she had once ruled, her eyes scanning houses with a mix of nostalgia and entitlement, a familiar unease surged through me, but was tempered by the sharp clarity that only preparedness can give, knowing that her shock would come not from threats or force, but from the realization that she had returned to a world where control was no longer hers, that every property she had claimed, every yard she had trespassed upon, was now under my ownership, and she would quickly learn that past authority carries no weight against present ownership. As she drew closer, the neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Dogs paused mid-bark, wind shifted in the trees, and even the sunlight felt charged with anticipation, highlighting the meticulous order I had imposed over the years. Each fence post, each trimmed bush, each freshly painted door a silent testament to the fact that this was no longer her domain. And when she reached the first property line, her confidence wavered, subtle but unmistakable, a flicker of uncertainty betraying the storm of expectations she had carried in her mind. Assuming the old rules still applied, I approached deliberately, projecting calm authority, letting her see that my resolve was unshakable. And in that moment, the months of intimidation she might have attempted, the imagined leverage of her criminal past, and the reckless bravado she had carried for years, collided with the stark reality of deeds, legal control, and meticulous preparation. And as she tried to assert herself, demanding recognition, claiming the block belonged to her in some archaic sense, I presented proof of ownership, tax records, property lines, and surveillance footage, each piece a silent hammer striking down her illusions. And as she fumbled, the neighbors began to notice the shift in power, watching from porches and windows as the once feared instigator faltered. Realizing that the tables had turned in a way that was both public and undeniable, her face shifted through shock, anger, desperation, and finally, an almost visible sense of humiliation as she grasped that the authority she had relied upon for decades was meaningless here. That she was, for the first time, subject to consequences rather than wielding them. And with every word I carefully chose, every document I revealed, and every boundary I enforced, the psychological weight of the reversal became heavier, pressing down not on me, but on her bravado, crumbling under the undeniable proof that her return had been miscalculated, that the predator she once embodied was now the one being outmaneuvered. The confrontation reached a fever pitch as she attempted one last bluff. A desperate claim that neighbors and history should back her, that her notoriety carried legitimacy, but it fell flat against the unassailable record, the vigilant neighbors, and the quiet, unyielding authority I projected. And in that moment, the sheer absurdity of her overconfidence became almost tangible, a cautionary display of hubris undone by preparation and strategic patience. And as the minutes stretched, it became clear that the drama was no longer a question of who would win, but how complete the transformation of power had become, that the block itself had shifted allegiances silently, siding with law, order, and rightful ownership rather than fear and reputation. The turning point crystallized when she attempted to cross the threshold of the last property, a symbolic act of defiance, only to be stopped decisively by the boundary markers, surveillance cameras, and my unwavering presence. And in that instant, the metaphorical and literal gates of authority slammed shut on her, her every claim nullified, and the tension snapped in the air, leaving a charged silence that spoke louder than any words, a silence filled with recognition from neighbors, a mixture of relief, awe, and a newfound respect for the one who had stood firm. And as she finally backed away, the sun casting long shadows over the block, I realized that the confrontation had not just been about ownership or property lines, but about the transformation of fear into empowerment, chaos into order, and uncertainty into dominance. And even as she retreated, plotting perhaps to return or regroup, the lesson was already imprinted. Power assumed recklessly, without preparation, without legitimacy, is fragile, and the real authority lies in readiness, strategy, and resolve, leaving a lingering cliffhanger in the air. Karen had returned expecting to reclaim her domain, but what she had encountered instead was the full weight of someone who had prepared for her every move. And the question remained: would she accept defeat, or would she return to test a block that had already been fortified against her influence, setting the stage for consequences even more decisive than this confrontation? In the aftermath of Karen's failed attempt to reclaim the block, a quiet but profound shift settled over the neighborhood, a mix of relief, vindication, and a new understanding of power that stretched far beyond property lines. And in those first days, as I walked along the streets surveying the land I now fully controlled, checking fences, doors, and every property corner, I felt a sense of authority that was simultaneously exhilarating and sobering, because I realized that victory in such conflicts is never just about the immediate confrontation, but about the subtle psychological dominance, the careful documentation, and the strategic preparation that makes intimidation powerless. And as the neighbors gradually came back into their routines, cautiously observing the changed dynamic, I noticed a ripple of respect and cautious admiration. Some whispered apologies from those who had once feared Karen's influence, others quiet acknowledgments that the balance of power had irrevocably shifted, and it became clear that this wasn't just a personal victory, but a structural one, a recalibration of the block itself, where authority, legality, and readiness now held precedence over chaos, fear, or reputation. Over the following weeks, I worked methodically to reinforce both the physical and legal boundaries of my properties, installing additional locks, updating documentation, and consulting legal experts to ensure no one, not even someone with a notorious history like Karen, could exploit ambiguity or intimidation to undermine the sovereignty I had established. And each action carried a weight far beyond the practical, becoming a visible, almost symbolic marker of control and resilience that the entire neighborhood could see, a subtle but undeniable message that ownership and preparedness trumped audacity. Socially, the effect was profound. Neighbors who had once whispered stories of Karen's dominance now approached me openly, some with expressions of gratitude, others with curiosity about how the shift had occurred, and slowly, a new culture took root on the block, one in which accountability and strategy replaced fear and rumor, where the precedent of my stand became a cautionary tale for anyone tempted to overstep bounds, and even casual conversations in local stores or over fences carried references to the audacious reversal. A reminder that those who assume authority recklessly often underestimate those who have prepared. Psychologically, the resolution was equally powerful. The months of tension, sleepless nights, and anxiety gave way to a deep sense of empowerment and clarity, the kind that comes only when a challenge has been faced with foresight, patience, and decisive action. And walking the block, observing the restored order and calm, I realized that this was more than a property victory. It was a lesson in boundaries, respect, and personal sovereignty, a testament to the fact that standing firm against intimidation and overreach reshapes not only the immediate situation, but also the attitudes and expectations of everyone involved, financially and legally. The consequences were concrete and lasting. The properties were secure, the ownership unquestioned, and the detailed records I had prepared ensured that any future attempt at harassment, manipulation, or illegitimate claims could be swiftly and decisively addressed. While Karen's influence waned as the community recognized the futility of her tactics, leaving her reputation diminished and her leverage gone, a powerful illustration that audacity alone cannot overcome strategy, preparation, and legal authority, and that time, patience, and careful planning can turn even a seemingly desperate situation into a total victory. Over the months, I also reflected on the broader lessons this experience had offered, the subtle dynamics of power in neighborhoods, the ways fear and intimidation can control behavior, and how quickly perception shifts when authority is exercised with clarity, legitimacy, and resolve. And I realized that the true takeaway was not simply the triumph over a single antagonist, but the knowledge that vigilance, strategic planning, and unwavering confidence in one's rights create a foundation that cannot easily be shaken, and that the act of standing firm has ripple effects far beyond the immediate conflict, influencing behavior, expectations, and culture across an entire community. In practical terms, the block became more orderly, respectful, and secure, not because rules had changed, but because the understanding of consequences had, and every property line, fence post, and boundary marker became both a literal and symbolic reinforcement of control, serving as daily reminders that the past chaos had been replaced with deliberate, unassailable authority, while Karen's presence, once a source of tension and fear, became a distant echo, a cautionary tale rather than an active threat. Socially and psychologically, the long-term impact was profound. Neighbors began to operate with more trust, less fear, and an appreciation for the importance of preparation and strategic thinking. And the story of my confrontation spread subtly through the community as a lesson in resilience, planning, and measured action, inspiring others to recognize the importance of asserting their rights and maintaining vigilance without resorting to rashness, intimidation, or aggression. Ultimately, the resolution reinforced a central truth that resonated beyond the block: authority without preparation is fragile. Intimidation without legitimacy is powerless, and standing firm with knowledge, strategy, and patience transforms fear into empowerment, chaos into order, and potential loss into lasting security, leaving an enduring legacy that shaped the neighborhood, influenced behavior, and served as a vivid reminder that justice, control, and personal sovereignty are not granted. They are claimed, defended, and maintained. And the final thought lingers, challenging the viewer to consider their own boundaries and readiness. In a world full of overreach and assumed power, are you prepared to stand firm and turn the tables when the moment arrives?